Have you ever wondered how a single act of kindness can change a life forever? Watch as a lonely 1800s rancher opens his door to a grieving Apache widow. What begins as shelter transforms into trust, love, and unexpected companionship. Subscribe now to follow this unforgettable Wild West journey. Let's get started. The sun dipped behind the red cliffs, spilling molten gold across the dry desert. Daniel Carter rode slowly, the reins heavy in his hands. He had spent decades on this land alone, the wind his only companion, the cattle his only company. Every day blended into the next, quiet and unbroken. Evening shadows stretched long across the worn path to his cabin. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, tinged with the faint copper scent of the cliffs. Daniel's horse snorted, pawing at the ground, sensing something ahead. Daniel slowed, squinting against the dying light. He could see a figure near his gate. She stood there with a small bundle, clothing tattered, hair caught in the wind. Her posture was guarded, shoulders slightly hunched, but her eyes were firm, dark and unwavering. Despite her apparent weariness, there was a dignity in the way she faced him, a quiet strength Daniel hadn't expected to find in anyone. He reined in the horse, resting a hand lightly on the saddle horn. His rifle was strapped across his back, but he didn't reach for it. He studied her carefully, measuring danger and kindness alike. She met his gaze steadily, neither pleading nor threatening. The silence stretched between them, a delicate negotiation of trust. "I need shelter," she said softly, voice low but clear, carrying across the distance between the cabin and the gate. The words were simple, yet layered with exhaustion, fear, and something deeper: loss. Daniel's jaw tightened, remembering his life alone, the solitude he had built brick by brick around his heart. He studied her more closely. Her face was lined, not with age, but with hardship. Her hands clutched the bundle with a protective grip, knuckles white. Her eyes betrayed nights of sleepless worry, but also a steady determination not to beg, not to plead for what she needed. Daniel respected that. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass and sending dust swirling across the trail. Daniel's horse shifted under him, ears flicking toward the woman. She remained unmoved, even as the wind tore at her tattered shawl. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of choice pressing against his chest. He could turn her away, let the desert swallow her, maintain his lonely safety. But something stirred within him, a memory of his mother, of his sister long gone, of faces he could no longer see but could still feel. He remembered nights spent wishing for someone to share a word, a fire, a simple smile. He realized that the quiet pull toward compassion was stronger than fear. He nodded slowly, careful not to appear hurried or overly eager. "You may stay for the night," he said, voice steady yet warm. He didn't smile, he hadn't in years, but the words themselves were enough to bridge the chasm of distrust between them. She blinked once, absorbing his choice. With a careful step, she advanced, bundle in hand. Every movement spoke of exhaustion, yet also caution. Daniel watched her, heart noting the way her feet dug into the earth, as if measuring it, assessing the terrain as if to ensure nothing would harm her again. She stopped at the gate, studying the cabin, and he could see the small hesitation in her stance. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible, more to herself than to him. Daniel inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words without speaking. He knew she had survived worse than his silence. It was enough that she had accepted the night's reprieve. The wind carried her scent, earthy, faintly smoky, and he realized how alone he had been in the years it had taken for such scents to fade from memory. He led his horse slowly down the path, opening the gate wide. She paused, shoulders squared, eyes following him. He gestured toward the cabin. "Inside," he said simply. She nodded, bundle clutched tightly to her chest. Her boots scuffed the wooden porch as she stepped up, the sound crisp in the cool evening air. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old blankets. Daniel moved to the hearth, stoking the dying embers, careful not to startle her. She lowered her bundle onto the floor near the fire, knees bending slightly, as if each step exhausted her further. The flames reflected in her eyes, revealing shadows of pain, loss, and something undefinable, a life that had been harsh and demanding. Daniel offered her a chair, but she remained standing a moment longer, surveying the small room. Every item, every tool, every grain of dust spoke of his life alone. She did not speak, yet the quiet was not oppressive. It was a cautious negotiation of space, an understanding that trust had not yet been earned, only offered. He fetched a pot of water from the shelf, warming it over the fire. She watched silently, hands folded, knuckles still white. He poured the water into a bowl and set it before her. She knelt carefully, cupping the warmth in her hands, and sipped slowly. Each sip seemed to restore a fragment of strength, each breath a reminder that she was still alive. Her eyes met his once more, dark and guarded. "My name is Aita," she said softly. Daniel nodded, committing it to memory. "Daniel," he replied, voice steady, carrying no judgment or interrogation. Names were small, but they anchored people in space and time, a simple act of acknowledgement. Night fell fully, shadows stretching across the floorboards. The fire flickered, casting long shapes along the walls. Daniel watched her as she finally lowered herself to the floor near the hearth. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if every muscle remembered the cold she had escaped. He remained standing, silent sentinel until her breathing slowed, shallow but steady. For hours he stayed awake, listening to the wind moan against the cabin and the soft crackle of the fire. His thoughts wandered to the desert beyond, to the harsh cliffs, to the unforgiving plains he called home. Yet none of that seemed as threatening as the fragility between frost and fire. By midnight, her head rested against the warm blanket he had provided. Daniel remained seated, rifle within reach, eyes never leaving her form. In that moment, he understood something profound. Kindness in these lands was both rare and dangerous. Yet it was worth the risk, worth the cold, the solitude, the uncertainty. The fire dimmed, shadows dancing across her face. Even in exhaustion, even in fear, there was resilience there, an ember that refused to be snuffed. Daniel felt an unfamiliar tug at his chest. He realized he had not expected to care, had not allowed himself to hope for connection. Yet here it was, undeniable. Hours passed. The wind outside grew colder, rattling the cabin walls. Daniel added another log to the fire, sparks spiraling toward the ceiling. Aita stirred but did not wake. He watched, noting the rise and fall of her chest, the careful balance of her limbs. He thought of how close she had been to death, how fragile human life could be in this wilderness. The night deepened, cold and silent. Daniel's thoughts drifted to his own past, the choices that had led him to solitude, the women he had turned away, the friendships he had avoided. Yet, in this small, quiet act of sheltering another, he felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. Something old and stubborn inside him softened. As dawn approached, the first light filtered through the cabin window. A soft glow kissed Aita's face. Her eyelids fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes, dark and wary, but alive. Daniel's presence remained calm and non-threatening. He had done nothing heroic by frontier standards, yet he had preserved a life, and in this he found a quiet satisfaction deeper than solitude ever offered. She blinked, then slowly sat up, shivering. Daniel moved closer, offering his coat. Her hand brushed against his briefly, a gesture both of gratitude and recognition of his care. He nodded silently, understanding that no words were necessary for the unspoken connection forming between them. Outside, the wind still whispered across the red cliffs. Inside, the cabin held warmth, not only from the fire, but from the fragile trust that had begun to take root. Daniel had opened his gate, offered shelter, and allowed another human to cross the threshold of his life. In doing so, he had crossed one himself. And as the sun rose fully over the desert, painting the cliffs gold, Daniel Carter understood that the frontier could be harsh, unforgiving and lonely. But it could also carry unexpected grace, subtle enough to change the course of two lives forever. Nights stretched long over the red cliffs, each one heavier with cold and silence. The fire in the cabin crackled softly, casting flickering shadows along the wooden walls. Daniel Carter sat near the hearth, watching the widow, Aita, as she wrapped her hands around the warmth of the flames, lost in her thoughts. Her dark eyes, though weary, reflected the firelight with a spark of cautious curiosity. She moved carefully, each gesture measured, as if testing the boundaries of this small space she now shared with him. Daniel noticed every motion, every twitch of muscle and flicker of expression, cataloguing her presence in silent observation. The first evening passed in quiet. Daniel did not speak much, allowing her to settle. Aita's eyes scanned the cabin, the hearth, the simple furnishings that had been his companions for years. There was no judgment in her glance, only assessment. A woman weighing safety against uncertainty in the way only someone who had lost everything could. By the second night, the air between them had changed subtly. Shared labor, stacking firewood, tending the small garden, repairing a fence, built an unspoken bond. Daniel found himself watching her strength, the quiet precision with which she handled tasks he had once thought mundane. She's carried herself with dignity, even when exhaustion weighed her down. At twilight one evening, Aita paused in the doorway, her hands still dusty from work. She met his gaze directly, calm and measured, her voice soft but steady. "Do you want a wife or just shelter?" The question hung in the smoky air, clear and deliberate, testing the boundaries of his long-built solitude. Daniel's jaw tightened. For years, solitude had been his shield, his safeguard against disappointment, loss, and entanglement. Yet here, in the firelight, he felt that shield beginning to crack. He exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze, considering the weight of her presence, the courage in asking, and the hope underlying her words. "Maybe both," he admitted finally, his voice low and steady. The confession was not bold but deliberate, a careful bridge between two guarded souls. Aita's lips curved in the faintest smile, a gesture of acknowledgement, recognition, and quiet relief. The cabin felt warmer now, though the wind still howled against the walls outside. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Mornings brought shared labor, feeding livestock, mending fences, drawing water from the well. Daniel found himself anticipating her presence, the way her hands moved, the careful way she navigated the uneven boards of his porch. Silence became companionable, a gentle acknowledgement of trust forming slowly between them. Evenings returned them to the fire, where conversation remained sparse but meaningful. She spoke occasionally of her past, her lost family, her people, and the lands she had traveled. Daniel listened, offering no judgment, only attention. In return, he shared fragments of his own history, carefully selected to reveal parts of himself without vulnerability he was not yet ready to expose. Draping it gently over her shoulders, she did not pull away, only allowed herself a moment of comfort, eyes meeting his briefly, trust flickering in their depth. Time passed in the rhythm of work and quiet companionship. The walls of Daniel's cabin held more than heat. They held safety, warmth, and a subtle understanding that both were searching for something neither had dared name aloud. Aita's presence challenged him, softened the edges of his solitude, and introduced a warmth he hadn't known he needed. One afternoon, as he repaired a broken fence post, Aita approached carrying a small basket of herbs. The sunlight caught in her dark hair, and for a moment Daniel paused, appreciating her strength, grace, and resilience. She moved silently, offering the herbs without words, a gesture both practical and intimate, acknowledging his presence and partnership. At dinner, they shared food in quiet communion. She spoke briefly of meals she remembered from her childhood, spices and flavors that lingered in memory. Daniel listened, savoring both the story and the sound of her voice, a rare melody amidst the howling wind outside. Laughter was still rare, but moments of lightness began to punctuate the long, cold days. Then came a night when the wind gusted violently, rattling the cabin walls. Ayita's eyes were wide with unease as the storm rattled the wooden boards. Daniel moved close, steadying himself beside her. "You're safe," he murmured. She nodded, drawing comfort from the simplicity of his words, the solidity of his presence. That night, the fire burned brighter, casting longer shadows, and trust deepened. By midwinter, their connection had solidified into quiet companionship, a mutual respect rooted in survival and shared solitude. Daniel found himself anticipating her presence, noticing her small gestures, her sighs, and the subtle ways she adjusted to the rhythm of his life. In turn, Ayita began to share more of herself, stories and memories once locked tightly away. One evening she paused near the hearth, looking at him with intensity. "Do you ever regret the choice to live alone?" she asked. Daniel considered the question, watching the flames. He thought of years of silence, solitude, and self-reliance, then glanced at her. "Perhaps I did," he admitted, voice low, "until now." The winter passed slowly, but the cabin was warmer than ever. They worked together, laughed quietly of small mishaps, and shared the tasks of daily life. Daniel began to notice that moments of vulnerability no longer frightened him. He began to welcome them, recognizing that connection did not always bring loss. Sometimes it brought life. One morning, as dawn broke and light spilled across the snow-covered plains, Daniel found Ayita, watching the sunrise from the porch. Her eyes glistened with tears. Together,
she did not
they
move
watched
to
the
speak.
first light
Daniel
of day,
joined her, standing
a silent
close but not
acknowledgement
touching.
of the bond they had forged. Weeks later, as the season shifted, Ayita prepared food over the fire, while Daniel tended the small garden outside. They moved with synchronized ease, a quiet harmony built from months of shared experience, trust, and mutual understanding. Words were few, but actions spoke volumes in the growing intimacy of their shared life. One evening, she asked softly, "Do you think a man can change?" Daniel paused, considering. "If he's willing," he replied, "and sometimes it takes another to show the way." Her eyes softened, gratitude and hope mingling, a quiet acknowledgement that both had changed through their unexpected companionship. By late winter, the ranch had become a haven, not only for themselves, but for the few neighbors who passed by. Word spread of Daniel's kindness and the widow who had found shelter. The cabin was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was a place of life, warmth, and cautious hope, the beginnings of a new chapter for both. As spring approached, the snow melted, revealing the plains in soft greens and browns. Daniel and Ayita worked side by side, tending livestock and repairing fences. Each day, their bond strengthened, built on trust, respect, and small acts of care. Solitude had been replaced with partnership, and fear had been replaced by hope. One morning, Ayita spoke quietly, voice tinged with emotion. "I found a home here, with you." Daniel's heart tightened at the words. He nodded, eyes meeting hers. "And I found a reason to stay," he said. The acknowledgement was simple, yet profound, a mutual acceptance of vulnerability and connection. By the end of winter, the ranch felt alive in a way it never had before. Fires burned, laughter occasionally echoed across the cabin, and the companionship between Daniel and Ayita had become a cornerstone of their lives. The solitude he had once cherished had transformed into shared strength and quiet love. One final evening, as the sun dipped behind the red cliffs, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, Daniel and Ayita stood side by side on the porch. The wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and earth. They did not speak, for words were unnecessary. Their journey, from caution and fear to trust and connection, had reached a fulfilling emotional milestone. In the fading light, Daniel took Ayita's hand gently. She did not pull away. Instead, she held it firmly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, the hardships endured, and the new life they were building together. The cabin, the fire, the winter, they had survived it all together. As night fully settled, the stars glimmered across the clear western sky. Daniel looked at Aita, at the woman who had arrived weary, cautious, and alone, and he realized the magnitude of the journey. Shelter had led to companionship, fear had led to trust, and the unexpected connection had reshaped both their lives. And as the first chill of spring touched the plains, Daniel, Carter, and Aita understood that some walls are meant to fall, solitude is meant to be shared, and even in the harshest wilderness, hearts can find warmth in each other.